I'd like to get started in the interest of time. So can you all kindly take a seat? My name is Lynn Levine. I've been a Hastings resident for 39 years. My kids both went to school here, pretty much without incident. And I've been a league member for about the last year and a half. And I would like to welcome you all here for the School Board Candidates Forum. I'd like to thank my colleagues from the league, Pat Rodriguez, our very able-minded and able-bodied secretary, Jodie Meyer, who is the incoming Voter Services Chair, and I would like to introduce you to our moderator for the evening, Karen Schatzel. Karen's been a league member for 40 years and has been active at all levels in both the local and the county league. There you go.
Thank you very much, Lynn, and thank you for inviting me tonight. The reason I was invited is because it's the policy of the League of Women Voters that moderators not come from the district where the election is taking place. So the upside of this is I don't know any of the candidates, and I am, of course, very nonpartisan, being a part of the League of Women Voters, so I have no partiality. The downside of that is, though, that I don't know the candidates, and if I get their names mixed up, I would welcome a correction, please. And if I don't know some issue that is a hot issue here that somebody brings up, and just take into account that I'm ignorant of the whole thing, okay? The meeting format was developed by the League of Women Voters in cooperation with the PTSA. I'm sorry that we don't have a representative of the PTSA to welcome you all tonight, because obviously this is something that's very important to your school district and also to your community. But the PTSA has been very much involved, and we have questions from them. So I will just go over a little bit of the format for you this evening. We've already made some changes. As you know, the candidates are, I should do this in the order in which they're seated: Christina Mitchell, Tim Baer, Rob McQueen, Lauren Berman, and Jodie Meyer. They are seated in the order in which they will be making their 2-minute opening statement, and they drew lots before the meeting began, so that we will start with the opening statements of 2 minutes, and then we will go to questions that have been provided by the PTSA. The candidates will have 1.5 minutes, and we will rotate. The number 2 person will start with the first question, the number 3 person will start with the second question, and so forth and so on. So we will rotate so that everybody has a chance to respond to all the questions. After we have taken 3 questions from the PTSA, we will open it up to questions from the audience. And I would ask you please to limit your questions at that time to 1 minute. I know that's difficult, but especially since the candidates will only have 1.5 minutes to respond, please, no complicated questions. I should say no long-term questions. There is one thing as far as videotaping, and I would like to thank the audio-video technician, Patrick Theodore. Mr. Theodore, thank you for your great assistance this evening. And there is, however, a policy from the League of Women Voters on videotaping, because we tend to be rather protective of videos so that people cannot excerpt them for their own use in electioneering. So there will be no videotaping from your phones, please. And if I see anybody videotaping, I'll have to stop the meeting and we'll have to ask you to stop. At this point, of course, I would ask you anyway to turn off your phones or to put them on vibrate or whatever so that we can go on without the candidates being interrupted. We will now go to opening statements of 2 minutes. Our timekeeper is in the front. The timekeeper will be indicating. Jodie, you're the official timekeeper, or is this a shared? Okay, all right. And since it's a 2-minute opening statement, they will be notified when they have 1 minute remaining and then when they have 30 seconds remaining. So it's a little bit distracting for the candidates, especially if they've never participated in something like this before, but we'd like to keep to the time. I will not interrupt you in the middle of a sentence, but I would ask you not to have any run-on sentences, as your teachers have told you. All right. Our first opening statement, as I said, the candidates drew lots, will be from Christina Mitchell. Ms. Mitchell?
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you to the League of Women Voters for putting this together alongside the PTSA, and thank you all for coming here tonight. My name is Christina Mitchell. I have lived in Hastings for over 40 years. I've attended all 3 of the Hastings schools, as well as my husband, Tommy. He, too, is a longtime Hastings resident. We have 2 children. Our daughter, Katie, is in 6th grade. She attends Farragut Middle School. Our son, David, is in 3rd grade, and he attends Eagle Hill School. I attended NYU, Barnard College, and Teachers College, Columbia University, where I received my degree in secondary social studies education. For the past 17 years, I have taught at Irvington Middle School in Irvington, New York. Currently, I am teaching 7th grade general education as well as ICT classes. Since 2014, I have served on the SEPTA School Board here in Hastings, advocating for the rights of special education students and their families. I'm very proud of the work SEPTA has done. The Diversified School Board is a successful school board. As a teacher, I would be a valuable addition to the Board of Education because I can bring a perspective to the Board of Education that currently does not exist. From high-stakes testing to teaching social-emotional learning, to mandates, to differentiated instruction, to teaching all students, no matter what their learning needs may be, I understand these issues because I live these issues every day. My running partner, Rob, and I maintain that in order to have an effective school board, we need to have a shared vision that reflects the values of the community. That's you, the people of Hastings. We need to establish partnerships with each other that transforms the way we think about education and the way we communicate with each other. Thank you.
One last thing. Could I ask you please to hold your applause until the very end, okay? Just in the interest of time. At the very end of the program. Thank you. Our second opening statement will be from Tim Baer. Mr. Baer.
Great, thank you. And thank you, League of Women's Voters and PTSA. It's a pleasure to be here. And I think the first thing I want to say is that through this process, I've been incredibly impressed by the knowledge and the passion of everyone at the table with me. And I think it's safe to say that Hastings is in a good place through this whole process and with the Board of Education as it comes out of this election process.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Can you speak up a little bit?
Sure. So
don't take that off this time, my speaking. But if you cannot hear in the back, would you please raise your hand? Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, I will speak up. For those that don't know me, I've lived in Hastings for 9 years. I have 2 kids. Charlie is in 1st grade, Caitlin is in 4th grade, and my wife Sarah teaches in the high school. She's taught in the high school in the English department for the last decade. I think it's important for me to say, as this has come up more recently, to the extent that anyone feels that there's a conflict with having your spouse teaching in the district, I have made it clear when I joined the board 6 months ago, and I make it clear to the public today, that I would recuse myself to the extent that anything, in negotiations with the district. I'm not an education specialist. In fact, I've worked in finance for the last 13 years, and I run the U.S. government bond and U.S. inflation trading business for the Royal Bank of Scotland. I applied to the board 6 months ago to fill a vacant seat as a generalist. My thought process around it, my interest in the board, is around participating in the articulation of a new strategic plan. I think it's critically important. I'm sure we'll talk more about it over the course of this evening. Also, I felt it important to bring the voice of a minority to the board. Within Hastings, we don't have a broad minority population, but we have a very empathetic community. And I think it's important to sort of work with that empathy and kind of bring the minority view to the community. Lastly, it made sense to me, looking at the constituents of the board, that my finance background, to the extent that it would come into play.
Sorry, the time is up. Before we go on to the next speaker, there are seats up in the front if any of you who are standing would like to come up to the front.
It's like elementary school. Nobody's in the front row. It's terrible.
Okay.
I don't think it's fair that Tim didn't get applause. That's well said.
Our third opening speaker is Rob McQueen. Mr. McQueen.
Thank you, and I echo the thanks for the League of Women Voters and also for the PTSA, but also for you all to be here. It's not easy for us to find time to break away and to try to spend time on our own things and not just for dinner. So, listen, I've lived here for 6 years, but not concurrently. We left a few years back, moved upstate. We moved back a year and a half ago. My wife Rachel is in the back. My son Michael is in the back. When we moved back, there was no option to go anywhere else. We just wanted to come back home, as we said to Mikey. And we've had a great experience coming back. We're so happy to be here. We also have my daughter Maggie Rose. She's in 3rd grade. Mikey is in 6th grade at Farragut. Maggie goes here to Hillside. The question always is, why do you want to be on the board? And it might be a deeper question now than ever. I want to be on the board, not because I'm on the PTSA. I don't have that. I am not a policy wonk. I'm not a professional educator. I'm a marketer. And what I do every day is find solutions for my clients. I collaborate with a very diverse group, and I learn how to communicate that out to a diverse group. I learn to build consensus and to collaborate, and I think those are traits that are really important to the board. But the biggest reason is Michael and the fact that I'm a dad. So I believe in public education. I am a student I'm a product of public education. I believe in this school district. It's under stress. It's under pressure from all sides, from the national side, from everything else. I think it's really important for us to have a cohesive board who collaborates to find solutions to make sure that at the local level we're building the best school we can. So parents, students, teachers, administrators, the community working together. That's what Christina and I have built our campaign on, and that's why I hope to be a member of the board.
Thank you. The next opening statement will be from Lauren Berman. Ms. Berman?
Hello, and thank you all for coming tonight. I'm happy to be here. When I was a new teacher at a public school in Harlem labeled failing by the city, I put a lot of faith in the training I received. Among the many tenets for success, our staff leader stressed was that teachers should not smile. It felt so wrong, and it went against what I knew about kids, but I wanted so badly to succeed and for my students to achieve success. So I approached my students with kindness, but with a measured demeanor. Late in the year, I was helping Karina remove a live worm from a petri dish, and she screamed when the worm fell out of her hand. And I laughed, and my typically very busy classroom came to a halt. It was silent. I looked at the children's faces, and Mohammed said to me with surprise, "You laughed." And later that night, I went home and I cried. That day, I made a decision to advocate for what I know about children and learning, even if it meant going against what schools were saying was right. And I don't hold back the smiles. I'm a mom of a 4th grader at Hillside and a 2-year-old. I have a vested long-term interest in the success of all 3 schools in Hastings. I'm a Hillside volunteer on the building leadership team that began the Makerspace in 2013, an enrichment instructor and a class parent. I seek your vote because I believe I'm the type of voice the board needs, and I believe the time for my voice is now. Our district strategic plan was put on hold while we searched for a new superintendent, and the goals were to be focused specifically on the learning outcomes for all students through a whole child approach. Meanwhile, as a district, we remained reactionary to decisions about Common Core standards and New York State testing without a comprehensive K-12 strategy to guide all of Hastings students toward achievement. I believe that successful schools not only reflect the community, but they inspire our children to provide them with the knowledge and skills to make our community better. I believe many of you share that perspective.
Thank you. Again, there are seats here in the front if anybody would like to move up. Our last opening statement will be from Jodie Meyer. Ms. Meyer?
Thank you again to the League of Women Voters and the PTSA for sponsoring this important evening. Can you hear me? No. Okay. Can you hear me now? Okay. Over 25 years ago, I'm going to read really fast. I moved to Hastings, and since that time, my two sons have gone through the schools, K through 12, to college and grad school, and are both working, actually as teachers. When my children were in school, even though I was working, I wanted to get involved. So I became a class parent, a liaison rep. I served on the BLT, the building leadership teams at all three schools, which led to my greater involvement with the PTSA, first as a vice president and then as a co-president. Eventually, I decided to run for the board, and I've served for 3 terms. As many of you know, I've also been involved with the Hastings Rec basketball program, which my husband Steve Duver and I founded, and have run for 15 years. As a board member, I've served on several committees: facilities, finance, board operations, health and wellness, diversity and social and emotional learning, community leaders, and as a liaison to the student government. As a board member, I believe we must strive to be sure that every child's needs are met and all parents' voices are heard. We also must be aware of the greater needs of the community and do our best to keep our fiduciary obligation of budgeting in a way that keeps us fiscally responsible. We don't want this to be a place where people can't afford to live, especially if they've been here for a long time, maybe their whole lives. Professionally, I'm a clinical psychologist. I work with kids and families. I've consulted to Head Start and have worked both as a dean of students and currently am responsible for admissions and the wellness and counseling program at the CUNY School of Medicine at City College. This coming year will be one of many important changes. We'll have a new super. He'll need to hire 2 important players. We have challenges ahead in the area of curriculum, beginning the process of a strategic plan, and staying focused on diversity and inclusion for all. I believe that my personal and professional experience and my history in the district, in the community, and on the board will bring a much-needed perspective to the process. I'm honored to serve, and thank you.
Thank you. Is the sound a little bit uneven all over, or is it only my elderly ears? No, I'm serious. Where I'm standing, the sound is going up and down. Yes. It's uneven?
You gotta eat the mic.
Okay, again, well, could I ask you if you're having trouble hearing at any point, raise your hand so that we are aware of this up here, okay? Thank you. We're now going to go to the questions from the PTSA. The candidates just received these questions before we began this evening, and it gave them a little time to reflect. As I said, we'll be rotating on the board now, and this time we'll start with Mr. Baer and end with Ms. Mitchell. And the question from the PTSA is, how would you describe the Hastings community to a new superintendent, and how would you communicate our expectations of a person in that position?
Great. Well, thank you. We just went through this process of describing the Hastings community to a new superintendent in the process of interviewing, searching for, and then interviewing a slate of candidates. From my perspective, and I suspect it's shared, passion is one word that comes to mind. Engaged, but not just engaged, well-informed comes to mind. Progressive, in terms of across a spectrum of conservative and traditional to as progressive as it gets. I think we're probably somewhere slightly to the right or I guess in this case slightly to the left, moving towards progressive. And then the other thing I would say is sensitive to the recent past. Clearly, the special education lawsuit is still is critical and needs to be considered and thought about. We're going to get the results of the external audit in the next month, and I would make sure the superintendent is very sensitive to addressing the results of that audit and moving forward in a thoughtful and public way. What are the expectations? The expectations are to be out in front, talking to the community, communicating with the community, sharing his or her views with the community. I think that various sources of media are now expected from Hastings, which I think is, certainly within keeping with, how the world has ultimately evolved. So, and other expectations, obviously, thoughtful, deeply knowledgeable about education. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. McQueen?
Thanks. Well, I think in terms of describing, the community, I think it's a little bit of a tough one because it's a very special community, obviously. And I believe that it's an inclusive community, but I also believe that the community has a little bit of the old and the new in it. And I think that's something that's really important for not just the superintendent, but for a lot of us to understand. Certainly the super would need to understand that he's coming into a place that, not divisive in terms of the community, but again, certainly different needs from different segments of the community. And I think we want a superintendent that could look at all sides and be able to hopefully bring them together. I think the super's got to be flexible. I think obviously very knowledgeable. I think powerful. I think the superintendent has to be decisive and has to not be afraid to make tough decisions and to believe in the things that they believe in and to communicate them. So I think my thing with the expectations is to innovate, to be flexible, to communicate, and to be decisive.
Thank you. Ms. Berman?
I would describe Hastings as a vibrant, also engaged community with high expectations of our administration, teachers, and staff, and also high expectations of achievement for our students. We're a community that cares. We care about our children, and we care about the quality of classroom interaction that they have. We also are creative and interested in learning. I would think that the person who is our superintendent, most of all, would be a passionate learner and a leader of a love of learning. He or she would have to be a visionary and a thinker and a great communicator, but I think demonstrating to our community a love of learning and leading that for our children would be the greatest way our superintendent could lead as a superintendent. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Meyer?
Can you hear me now? I know you couldn't hear me before. Okay. So, all of us up here, in many ways, are very much on the same page, and I think we're kind of all on the same page so far, at least, and I think Christina will be, about this community. And I think this is a pretty special place to live, and I think that's why we've all chosen to live here. And for many of us, many people who are in the audience who have chosen to stay here, I think it's a very forward-looking community. I think it's devoted passionately to kids and to educating kids, but kids who have the ability to be well-rounded, who can do what they want to do, who can be actively engaged in school, in science, in sports, in music, in whatever they want to do, and that they can leave the system being curious and wanting to go on out into the world and continue their learning in however they choose to do it. The most important thing, I think, when we were interviewing candidates for the new superintendent was when they asked about the community, I think the thing that described it best was we talked about kids' experience of going to school here and when they leave here and how much they realize what it was like to grow up in a place like Hastings and have a school experience. They realize that there aren't many places like that when they get to college around the world. I would say if I had to pick one thing coming out of where we've been, the most important message I would give to our new superintendent is he has to communicate. But he has to come in with a plan, and he has to first listen. And I have to stop.
Thank you. Ms. Mitchell?
Okay. A lot of my fellow candidates up here have said amazing things, and I would definitely concur with many of them. From my own personal experience growing up here in the 1970s, there was a bumper sticker that was on the back of many cars, and it said, "Hastings is a neat place to live." And I think we had one mom who's in the audience. We had I think it was a Ford LTD, and we had one on the back of the car. It is, and it was a neat place to live back then, and it's a neat place to live now. I think it's changed a bit in its demographic, but I think it retains some of the same values that it's always had. I think people want to be good to each other, good neighbors. They want their kids to grow up and be educated. I would say to the new superintendent that I would want the new superintendent to be a leader. I want the new superintendent to be an educator. I want that superintendent to be walking around in the schools and seeing what's going on and engaging not just with teachers, but with custodians, with the aides, with the students, with everybody. That's what we need. That's what a leader is in a school. And that superintendent also has to unify this district. Because right now, this district, let's face it, there are segments that are not really feeling like they're part of this community.
Thank you. Before we go on to the next question, I noticed there are a lady or two who came in later. There are still seats in the front if you'd like to come and sit down. The next question from the PTSA will start with Mr. McQueen and end with Mr. Baer this time. That question is, what do you see as the Hastings School's strengths and weaknesses, and what would you do to address the weaknesses?
Well, I think the strengths are pretty obvious in terms of the diversity of offerings, the diversity of thinking. I think that we're very proud of being a blue ribbon school, and we're very proud of being able to put through our system very smart, bright, successful children to adulthood. And I think there's probably nobody that will sit up here and tell you that the school system doesn't have its strengths and that we should focus on the weaknesses. But it's easy to talk about the strengths. The weaknesses are tougher. I believe we have a weakness in administration. And when I say that, it's not because I'm picking on an administrator, but we're going to have a new superintendent, a new director of curriculum. We have a new principal at Hillside. We're going to have a new assistant principal at Hillside. We have a new head of special education, although certainly been in the district in a while. So I think the weakness that can become a strength is the fact that we're going to have a lot of new people in. They will not have that historical knowledge, which is a good and a bad thing. And I think that we have to address that head on and try to attract, obviously, and retain the best people, both in teaching but also in the administration.
Thank you. Ms. Berman?
I believe that our strengths are from the commitment of our community and teachers. The strengths are also from our children and the passion they bring to school every day, and the families that prepare the children to be ready to learn every day. I think also we were recently ranked by U.S. News as number 27 of all high schools in New York. There are only 2 other Westchester high schools above us in rankings. That certainly is a strength. In terms of weaknesses, I would say that one of the weaknesses that stands out to me most is that we have a lot of data about how our students do well at school and what their abilities are in learning. Yet there are few opportunities for our teachers to differentiate instruction. Without that differentiation, the learners in our classroom are not inspired to be all they can be and learn all they can learn in the classroom. To effectively change that, we need to work with the administration and teachers to capitalize on the data we have and to really provide opportunities for differentiation of instruction to all the students.
Thank you. Ms. Meyer?
So I think that many of our strengths are often our weaknesses here, and I think we have to start with, when you think about, first of all, I think our teachers and our staff are certainly our strengths. We have incredible people, and many who've been here for a long time. We have kids who are eager to learn and turn out to be very well-rounded, as I said before. I think that one of our major strengths and weaknesses is the issue of diversity. And I think it's certainly something that we are focused on, something that's important. We're not nearly as diverse as we ought to be, and we're trying very hard to address issues of diversity in the school, which we'll probably talk about later. I think that the weaknesses now are that we have a serious transition coming with many new faces, many new people, and people who haven't had experience, including our new superintendent, who has never been a sitting superintendent. And I think that there are many tugs and pulls here. I think another major weakness here that we have to address is our curriculum. We have to get it from the bottom up. We have to talk about articulation, vertical and horizontal, and we have to be sure that we have access and inclusion for everybody. What we need to do is deal first with the transition, let our superintendent get his feet wet, and then we all have to work together. We have to come up with a strategic plan that can inform our priorities, the initiatives we're going to take, and then we can address the weaknesses.
Ms. Mitchell?
Thank you. So the strengths of our schools. I think our teachers are extraordinary. I think they work so hard. I think they work well beyond the hours that many of us sometimes think teachers work. It is not unusual for me to receive an email from one of my daughter's teachers at 9 o'clock at night. It's not unusual for Gail Kipper to respond to one of my emails at 11 o'clock at night. Their devotion is inspiring, and I think this benefits our students, and I think that's why so many of our students do really well in Hastings, and they come out and they go to college, and we prepare them. But one of our weaknesses is that we need to teach in a way that's a little bit different, and we need to think about it differently. It's so easy to teach students who get it, who just inherently get it. But what about those students in the middle? How do we teach them, and how do we inspire them? And what about the students who are struggling learners? What do we do to create programs to help them so that they can obtain the skills that they need to succeed in life? And that's where I think we need to go. And that's what I believe.
Thank you. Mr. Baer?
Yeah, thank you. So, a lot of my thoughts around this question have been said. But the first thing that comes to mind when I think of strengths of this community, of our schools, is the community. And I think about that in the context of the teachers. I also agree. I mean, I truly believe we have teachers that go above and beyond what they're asked to do by contract or by mandate, and they do it because of passion. And the same can be said of parents. The parents here are obviously deeply, deeply engaged, and I think what that results in is really tremendous kids with true empathy for one another. I think looking at the schools, as the husband of a teacher in the high school, the empathy that I see that extends among students, it defies the cliques that I grew up with, and I think many of us grew up with. With respect to weaknesses, the number one weakness that I've seen over the last, call it 5 years, is really change management. There's an expectation, I think, because of the passion that we have as a community, there's an expectation that the administration is just going to know the answer. What I think we need to do collectively is, as Jodie pointed out, we have a tremendous amount of change coming in, and I think we are all going to need to collectively take a pause and understand that it's not going to be an immediate, snap of the fingers and we are perfect. It is going to be a lengthy change management process that working together and communicating, I think we have a tremendous super coming online. And I think, working and understanding change management together, we'll be in a good place. We failed this, I would say, the last time through, particularly around Common Core.
Thank you. Before we go to the last question from the PTSA, I notice there are a number of people standing now. There are seats sprinkled around the front. There are 3 seats right in the front, and there's one over there. And would you raise your hand if there's a seat next to you? If there's a seat next. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. This is the last question from the PTSA, and we'll start this time with Ms. Berman and end with Mr. McQueen. The question is, in what ways, if any, do you think the board can be more effective? What do you consider the board's priorities for the coming years, the coming school year? Ms. Berman?
Thank you.
Ms. Meyer, I'm sorry. No,
Thank you.
Ms. Berman.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I believe that the board can be more effective this coming year with a clear vision set from a strategic plan. The new plan is not to be operational as the last plan was set out to be, but rather curricular, with a focus on the learning outcomes for all children. It was supposed to have to utilize an approach called the whole child approach. It's a framework of system assessment, that seeks to evaluate how healthy, safe, engaged, supported, and challenged our students are. So I believe with that strategic plan in place, we would be a much more effective board. In terms of priorities, I would say putting that strategic plan in place is the number one priority, as well as working alongside the new superintendent. And with that, strengthening the effectiveness of the administration to follow through on that plan. And lastly, to work some more on the curriculum that we have, K through 12, to make sure that with the information we gather from the strategic plan, that we're able to provide learning opportunities that don't always respond to the Common Core, but rather work within their own framework to make sure our students are meeting New York State standards.
Ms. Meyer?
Well, I guess I'd start by saying that the board could always be more effective. There's no question about that. But I think what we need to do to be more effective in this coming year is do our own work as a board, whoever is on the board, to find a way to be able to work together. That doesn't mean everybody agree, but it means be respectful and really try to listen to each other and work towards the same goal of stewarding the district and working with our new superintendent. I think, as Lisa and Doug and Tim could tell you, it takes a long time to get up to speed when you come to the board. And I think the other thing the board can do to be effective is making sure that we support the faculty and staff and administration, who are the foundation of the school, so they know, because they're understandably really anxious about all the changes happening, and they need to know that we're all in this together. My priorities would be, I think that's the question, and I think I've said them really, but I don't think it's a strategic plan first, because I think we have to go through the transition, and then we have to work together and work with the community to come up with a strategic plan. So it's the transition, it's coming up with a strategic plan, and I will always, always go back to inclusion and diversity, that we have to keep it front and center, and we have some wonderful new programs in the schools working for students and helping teachers deal with these issues, particularly coming from a committee called Race Matters. And that's where I land.
Ms. Mitchell?
Thank you. So the goals of a board is to create a vision, create goals, and also help implement policy. A board doesn't oversee the day-to-day operations. That's the job of the superintendent. And I've gone to a lot of board meetings, and I've been pretty active via SEPTA, but I've just been an active parent as well. And I haven't really seen much of that. And I feel that as a board, to be effective, this board needs to come together and unify. Just this past week at the board meeting, it was very difficult. I have to be honest. It was difficult to be there. It was difficult to watch. It was difficult to listen to, because there's such divisiveness. I think the board needs to be transparent. I think the board needs to be honest.
Mr. Baer?
Sure. I look at this, I think, a lot like Jodie, in that I believe the strategic plan is a critical piece to have an effective board over any extended period of time. But I believe that the strategic plan is going to take time to form. It's going to take at least a year to work our way through it. In the meanwhile, I think the board needs to, one, certainly strive towards being significantly more collegial. I don't think that can be said any more strongly. I fully agree with Christina around that point. And then I think we need to look at what do we have right now active, what do we have within our schools? What are the specific issues that are front and center? So, for example, Hillside, the curriculum and the ELA curriculum is front and center. We need to start working on a way in which, in the name of increasing communication and transparency, we work towards what I consider to be a task force model. So both the community is involved, teachers are involved, and an individual from the board, so that decision-making and thought processes are much more inclusive of all three major constituent groups, rather than the board working independently and then making decisions. So I look towards a task force model. Another major issue, I believe, is sort of data-driven analysis, which I think we've fallen down on, but we really haven't had a chance to do it in the last 6 months because we've been focused on superintendent search. But a task force model that incorporates the community, parents, and teachers, and then obviously working towards a strategic plan.
Thank you. Mr. McQueen?
Well, I think in terms of being effective, I too was there on Tuesday night, and it was very difficult. And it seemed like it was the tip of the iceberg, and there was a lot more going on underneath. So I'm going to say that I think what would make the board more effective is what I talk about in business a lot, which is called trust. And I don't think there's a lot of trust. I don't think there was trust on Tuesday night. I don't think there was trust Tuesday night a month ago. And and along with trust goes honesty. So I'd like to see that the board makes a commitment to be more trusting of each other, more collaborative with each other. Certainly collegial is nice, but I do believe that there has to be some really difficult looking in the mirror and making decisions on how we want to run this board and lead this district. In terms of priorities, it's interesting, Tim, because you say it's going to take a year to do a strategic plan, then that just moved up to my priority. Because if it's going to take a year, we better start as soon as we get going. Because we need a strategic plan. You need process, you need plans, you need strategy to be able to be effective moving forward. And I would echo, I think Hillside, needs a little bit of work on the curriculum. I think special ed, obviously, should be a priority. We should be embracing the diversity and inclusion, not pushing it away.
Thank you. Thank you. That ends the questions from the PTSA. They submitted many more good questions, but we wanted to allow enough time for the audience. Now, in this portion of the program, I'm going to ask you just to line up 3 at a time, because otherwise you're going to be standing for a very long time, and it's possible that when the time runs out, because we only have about 55 minutes for audience questions, and when the time runs out, I don't want to see a long line of people frustrated, waiting, standing, and waiting. So what I'm going to ask you to do is come up 3 at a time. Oh, on the other aisle? Thank you, Mr. Theodore. All right, on the other aisle, and when one person is finished with their question, obviously another person can come into the line of 3. And Jodie will have the microphone over there, and we'll follow the same rotation unless a question is being asked to just one candidate. Now, of course, we would not allow any personal questions that would be out of order. And if there are any questions that I think are objectionable to the candidates or to the public, I will ask that question be removed, I'll say. So again, Jodie's going to go over to the other aisle,
That's
and
Jody.
the first
That's
three
Jody.
people who come up. But then, as I said, the first person who asks a question will sit down, and then another person can take the place in line. Thank you.
How many minutes do they have?
Oh, I'm sorry. 1 minute for a question, and again, the candidates will have 1.5 minutes. If the first question is to all of the candidates, we'll start with Ms. Meyer this time.
Can you hear me on this mic? Yeah, okay.
Hi, thank you so much for hosting this. My name is Jennifer Cunningham. I have a question actually for all the candidates, although depending on your experience on the board, it would change a little. As you're well aware, a very important function of the board is to hire, oversee, and evaluate the district CEO, its superintendent, in essence, making the board the superintendent's boss. So for the incumbents, Jodie and Tim, I would ask you, can you please give me a specific example when you disagreed with our superintendent, whether it's pedagogy, policy, practice, and how you went about reconciling that difference? And I would ask for the new candidates, Rob, Christina, and Lauren, can you give me an example from your experience here as a parent where you perhaps disagreed with the superintendent of the district, whether it's policy, pedagogy, and how you would have gone about addressing it?
Thank you. Again, Ms. Meyer, will you start?
That's really a hard one to think of an example of so quickly. I could think of several examples of times when I've disagreed with a superintendent, from things such as whether we should be promoting football because of all the literature about concussions, and it's become a joke on the board, but I actually am quite serious about it, to some issues regarding some things I've heard about teachers and staff. I can't give you the specific because that would be inappropriate and breaking confidentiality. So depending on what the issue is, I would either go to him personally and raise my concern with him, or I would bring it up at the board meeting, or meet with him first and then bring it up, put it on the agenda, bring it up at the board meeting. Or if it was a confidential issue, we would bring it up in exec session. I'm forgetting, Jen, the rest of your question. Was that the question? Okay. Okay.
Ms. Mitchell?
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I thought we were going. All right. So, hi. So in terms of dealing with a problem, and I've had a couple of issues here in the district, and what I have done is I have, as a parent, gone directly to the superintendent. Well, I shouldn't say directly. First you go to the teacher, then you go to the principal, then you go to the superintendent. Or if there's a matter of programming issues that I've had, specifically with special education, I have gone and spoken with the superintendent. And as a board member, I absolutely feel that that would be my duty. If there was a problem, an issue, if I felt that something was being done that was not in the best interest of the students or the community, I would directly address it with him. And I'm assuming it's a him, based from what I've heard. Could be a her. I'm not spreading any rumors here. But I would also consult, and I would also talk with my fellow board members. I think that is absolutely essential. When there is a problem, it shouldn't be a singular person really addressing it with the superintendent in a singular manner. It should be collaborative. There should be partnership. And I think going back to what Rob said about trust, I think that's part of the equation.
Great. Yeah, well, thank you. With respect to, as an incumbent, as a sitting board member, I was not in a situation where I needed to disagree in that the existing superintendent stated a desire to not have his contract renewed within, I would say, weeks of my arrival. That negated that. No, but I do think that how you go about addressing a disagreement it's critically important, and it's kind of fundamental to how we are supposed to behave. There are certain instances where it's going to be a highly sensitive individual matter, whether that be student, teacher. That is clearly, in my opinion, a situation like that, or that I'm thinking of, is a one-on-one discussion. A situation, an issue of pedagogy. There, as a part of a board, I would want to solicit feedback. Am I thinking about this the way you're thinking about this? Or is this the way in which you think that this material should be taught, the way teachers should be guided? And come to some kind of consensus as a board, or at least as some part of the board, to see whether or not I'm an outlier or I'm seeing the same issue, and then address it with the superintendent. So very much situation specific, but I think, that's it.
Well, I have not had a disagreement per se with the current outgoing superintendent. I will say I had the pleasure of having a great hour and a half with him after I was with Tim as finalist on being selected to be able to fill the open board role. And he and I had a coffee afterwards, and I thought he was lovely, I suppose. Said all the right things, said everything I wanted to hear, embraced me. Never heard from him again, never returned anything again. So I guess my disagreement is I'm not sure that's the way you want to be. I think it should be, I wrote something down before about attentive in a superintendent. I think that's a key word and something that I've been disappointed in. I don't believe you just come in and out. I don't believe you leave town quickly. I don't believe you go to your summer home. I believe you go to the events. I believe you go and be attentive to the community. And if you're going to speak to a parent, be engaged. Don't just tell them what they want to hear. How I would deal with it, I think, is as I think we've already heard a little bit, is the Board of Education is a body and is supposed to act like a body. It is not supposed to be an individual. So I don't think it would be my place to approach the superintendent and speak to the superintendent about an issue I had. I think I would have to go to my fellow board members and speak to the board about the issue and ask the board to bring that issue up to the superintendent. That is also a way that you build trust and you have honesty with each other, is because nobody's talking to an individual about a specific issue. Hello.
Ms. Berman?
Thank you. I wouldn't say I've had a disagreement with the outgoing superintendent either, but I did have several meetings with him about learning issues. And I can give an example. Back in 2012, when we were new and our daughter was in kindergarten, she was very, very much interested in science, and we were very confused and flabbergasted that there were no science opportunities for her in kindergarten. So we met with the teacher, and then we met with the principal, and then ultimately the superintendent. And after speaking to the superintendent, who told us we were waiting on the renewal of New York State standards in science, which actually just got passed in December, I realized that we needed to do something else. We went back to the principal and back to the teacher and found some other learning avenues for not only our daughter, but then I applied to be on the building leadership team in 2013 and address that issue there. So I found another avenue to address the issue when I could not get forward with the superintendent. And through the building leadership team, which was then with Laura Sullivan, we worked together to get the grant to build a makerspace in Hillside.
Thank you. Our next questioner, please.
My name is Elliot Weiner, and my question is in particular to Dr. Meyer, but to anybody else as well. We've heard a lot about the transitions that are occurring in this district and that have occurred over the last years. What advantage do you think there is to the district, to the voters, to the children of having the benefit of your 3 terms as a board member? And what disadvantages do you think that there are to having a board that has so many new members?
Elliot and everyone, I think obviously this is a blended board. Any way we look at it, given who's sitting on the board now, whoever else is elected amongst this group, we will have a board that is a combination of old and new. And I think that combination is probably just what we need right now. This is a time of change. We need new voices. We need to hear from people. We need people in the community, parents especially, to feel like their voices are being represented and heard. I guess I can only speak about me personally, and I think I have a lot of experience. I have professional experience. I've been working in this field as a psychologist my entire life. I've been working with kids, with teenagers, with parents. I've worked with all kinds of kids and parents. I am an educator at a medical school that admits kids out of high school. So I know about the whole education process, but most importantly, I've been in this district, I've been on the board, and I know a lot of the history, and I have the perspective of issues. You know, we go through cycles, and you start to hear things. You know, we always joke about it's the Halloween parade again at Hillside, but there are issues that come up over and over, and I think there's a lot of benefit to having someone on the board who has that experience, who has that perspective, and again, it's important that we'll all work together. There's no question. But I think there's...
That question was directed to Ms. Meyer, but...
I think everybody should answer it.
All the candidates will have a chance to comment on that aspect of it or a related aspect. Ms. Mitchell?
Oh, okay. So,
I know
yeah.
you're unprepared.
I'm not sure how to answer the three-term one, but what I can say is this, is we have some problems here in Hastings. And I think, and every time I've addressed the board, and I think if you look at the videotapes, I'm at almost every board meeting. Sometimes I'm there by myself. I'm the only person there. But I go because I want to see what's going on, because I'm interested, and I've done this well before I decided to run for the board. But I do feel that we need new blood. I am appreciative for the people who have worked really hard and donated their time, volunteered. I think it's amazing, and my hat's off to you. But I do think it is time that we have new voices and new perspectives on that board. And I think I'm one of those voices. I think that as a teacher, I think as a longtime Hastings resident, as a parent of a typical child and a child who has special needs, I think I can bring that. And I think there's a lot of people here who are also new, who can bring great things to the board. We shouldn't all have the same background. We should all have different backgrounds. We should bring our expertise to the table so that we can collaborate together and build a better school.
Thank you. Mr. Baer?
Sure. I think the question was advantages of long-term members and disadvantages of new members. I think I concur with Christina that there are quite a number of advantages that come with new members, and I think getting a broad diversity of backgrounds, professional and personal, is really quite important to move this board forward in a way that is really constructive for the community. I think the point has been made a lot about some of the challenges that the board has faced. I think with the arrival of a new superintendent, I think that a lot of those challenges will wind up being in the past, and it will be a clean slate, and people will be able to push forward. So I don't believe that there are particularly disadvantages of new members per se. With respect to advantages of long-term members, I do think that there is one, and I think it's important to keep in mind. There will be a new superintendent. I do anticipate that it is going to go very well, but I also anticipate that it's not going to be smooth sailing every day. And I think that those long-term relationships that exist throughout the building, it's easier to get more candid feedback from administrators and staff based on 10 and 15 and 20-year relationships, whether they're through my spouse or whether they're through long-term membership on the board. When it's time to get what's really going on, long-term relationships matter for getting to the heart of issues.
Mr. McQueen, would you like to comment?
I will, but I'll just go to one because I think we all are aware that a balance is what you want. So yes, we want institutional knowledge, but yes, we want new, fresh ideas. So hopefully we'll have a balance. I think regardless of how the election goes, we will have a balance. I'll respectfully though, just to address what Tim said, I actually believe the opposite of that. I don't want 15 and 20-year relationships talking to each other to try to make decisions. I don't want one-on-one conversations on the side saying, hey, they're trying to change things. What are we going to do? I want somebody to be able to go, by the way, first of all, when you're new, you're on a honeymoon, you're the shiny object, people want to talk to you, and you have the ability to be able to establish a relationship that's newer. That hopefully can be one, again, with trust, to overuse the word. So I would just disagree just a little bit. As much as I think there are long-term relationships that can be positive, I'd like to see new relationships developed for this community and new ideas brought. At the same time, we have the institutional knowledge and the balance that any board, and Doug would tell you, any board needs to be balanced between what people do, how they think, where they come from. We want that for our school board, too.
Ms. Berman?
Thank you. Yes, I concur with a lot of the descriptions that have already come up. I concur with a lot of the descriptions and advantages of old membership, and I agree that having a knowledge of institutional history is important for any school system to effectively run. But I believe that new board members bring fresh eyes to old problems. Perhaps, speaking about here comes the Hillside Parade again, maybe a new member wouldn't see it that way. Perhaps they would see a solution or create relationships that could move problems forward faster and swifter and more effective for our children. I believe also that I could be a new member that has a voice, not only as a parent in the district, but as a teacher, and I've also been an administrator. I've also been a board member on an independent school in New York City, and I've had that experience of making solutions happen with that type of constituency. When I was on that board, we actually went through a reaccreditation process with the New York State Association of Independent Schools, which is a top-to-bottom reevaluation of everything from philosophy and vision to how effectively the heating system runs. So it really is something that I've experienced before, and I'd like to be able to bring my fresh eyes to the old problems that exist.
Thank you. Next questioner, please.
Okay, hi. My name is Sue Mermelstein, and maybe I'm overly sensitive, but I was really taken aback when Jodie Meyer mentioned that we had hired a superintendent, which I assume will be announced, but it was the way that you did it as if we all knew it, and I imagine that most of us didn't. And to me, the point I'm trying to make is I think that's evidence of a certain insularity that a lot of us feel, where there's kind of the board and there's the rest of us. And I wonder if some of you would talk about how you would try to, bridge that gap. I mean, we talked a little bit about transparency and communication. How exactly will you do that? Because I really do feel there's a kind of the board and the rest of us. And how would you bridge that gap?
Thank you. Let's start with Ms. Mitchell this time, again, and we'll rotate.
All right. So I absolutely agree with you, and I have experienced the same thing for years. And again, I do respect the fact that these people are donating their time, and they really, I think that maybe their intent is good, but the delivery has not been at all. And I feel that in the process, it has really been divisive. It's been divisive in the community. I think it has been divisive within the schools. We talk about having new administrators come in. We talk about even some administrators who've been here. They want to work with a Board of Education that is going to be open and honest, and parents want that, and teachers want that. There shouldn't be this great big secret. There shouldn't be this room in the back where it feels like decisions are being made and predetermined before the rest of us have even been asked our opinion. And as a board member, I will tell you, I won't do that. That's not how I am. I'm a straight shooter. I'm open. I'm honest. And obviously, when things are confidential or I can't speak about it, that's a different story. But other than that, we need to communicate better with the entire community.
Thank you. Mr. Baer?
Sure. Well, I will tell you, I've been on the board as an appointed member for 6 months. And personal disagreements that have existed within the board notwithstanding, I can tell you wholeheartedly from the utmost, deepest parts of my being, that the intent among all 7 members of the board is not to be anything less than transparent. I think there exists potentially, as you asked that question, I thought that's a very reasonable question. I think by design, in a faulty design, the board has conducted its work on a twice monthly basis, closed the books on its work, and then followed up on what needs to get done within the schools. So the structure of the board hasn't done a good job at just the hillside headlines that we all get as parents of elementary students. The structure of the board hasn't been created to just say, boom, here's 6 bullets on what we did last night. Right? And that's not earth-shattering, but at least they're getting close. And then you hear that it's pretty well done. You'll be like, oh, well, last week I got a note that said they're getting pretty close. Confidentiality is important. There are limits on what the board can share, but I don't think it's through ill will or because there's some great want to keep the info. It's just structure, and with small tweaks, I think that'll be changed.
Mr. McQueen?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I agree both with what Christina and Tim say. I wrote it down too because I thought that was pretty interesting. Also on Tuesday night, we heard for the first time, I think that the special education report is going to be on June 6th. So glad to have heard it. Don't think it got disseminated. If you're interested, June 6th, board meeting, be there. You can learn all about it. I don't think there's intent either. I think, with all due respect, and not to speak on her behalf, but I think that's kind of what happens when you have 3 terms on a board. I think that sometimes we just start to think, this is the way it is, I know it, everybody else must know it, I'll just talk. So, and I don't know that, as I said, I'm not trying to speak for her, but I think to some extent there's a little bit of that with this board. I will say, I think that it'd be nice to have the transparency with the community, and I'm trying to be negative or anything, I'm trying to stay positive, but we need transparency on the board first. Because there are things going on inside the board and committee that is not being disseminated in a timely and honest fashion back to the rest of the board. And I think I'd start with transparency on the board. I'd then go to transparency with the rest of the community. And I'd ask the fellow board members that, as Tim said, let's communicate more effectively. The website didn't have the vote for this election until a couple of days, I think, or a week ago. So let's communicate better to the community, and we'll solve a lot of these problems.
Ms. Berman?
Thank you. There are avenues of communication. The board has posted its minutes up on the website. Meetings are open. Anyone can attend the generalized board meetings. The meetings are aired on our local television stations. But, let's face it, it's like watching C-SPAN. Nobody sits around and does it. We live very busy lives. We're all invested, but we do need bullet points. We do need a message that comes directly from the board saying what they're working on. I think that would be an effective way for people to understand what's happening. In terms of confidentiality, if there are things that can't be shared publicly, it could state that there are decisions being made on X, Y, and Z topics, and as soon as we're able to share, we'd be able to. But I think having an expedited way of sending bullet points to the school community, as either if it comes directly from the board or if it becomes part of a principal's message, would be a significant way to impact the way it communicates.
Thank you.
So,
I beg your pardon. I'm sorry.
I'm happy not to answer. Sue, first, my apology to you and to everyone, and I thank you. I really appreciate your getting up and asking this question. I didn't really intend to drop a bomb, And I will say and reiterate that what I talked about before was I really believe that communication and transparency are key in our next go-round as we get going with a new board and a new superintendent. And I think communication has been a problem, and I think if you spoke to people who've been on the board, they would say that that's something that we've continually raised as a problem. I'm pretty hopeful that our new superintendent, with this person, it will not be a problem. That said, I think the reason I said it, to be perfectly honest, is that I have gotten several emails, I've gotten calls from people in the district and out of the district about the person who we were about to hire. I was surprised. I thought this was all confidential, but that's not the way of the world anymore. And I don't say that that's something that happened by the board members breaking confidentiality. I think it happened outside of the district, and it came in. And so I guess I was just going with the assumption that people knew it, and we're about to make an announcement and have an evening when we have the new person come and everybody can meet him. I will say that well, there's just so much I can say, and I know I have 15 seconds left. I think...
Again, my apologies, Ms. Baer. I obviously need somebody to keep score for me. This is going to be the last person in the line. I'm sorry, but as you can tell, it takes about 10 minutes for each question, and I'm watching the clock. So this time, I think if the question is for all of the candidates, we'll start with Mr. Baer, but please ask your question.
Yes. Hi, my name is Jessica. Thank you, everyone, for being here. So my question is more specific about a topic that weighs on me as a parent of 2 elementary school kids, which is state testing. And I sort of see it as something imposed from on high. It's a law that we have to deal with. But what I want to know is, at least to the extent you can answer, how much latitude does a board have in terms of how they impose these testing requirements, and what would your philosophy be, or what is your philosophy as a parent and as an educator or a member of the board in terms of how to manage education in the classroom and the children's experience when there is that requirement sort of looming above?
Mr. Baer?
Sure. So I, too, have children in the elementary school, as I mentioned in my initial comment, 1st and 4th grade. It's something that we talk about in our house, and I will... Sorry, I will address the first part of your question by actually saying, quite honestly, I don't know what latitude we have with respect to, obviously, I guess the question is, do we have latitude to actually just put arm's length testing, right? I know that we have latitude to let the test run as is, right? But I think it is something that it is an issue that the district, Christina and I were talking about it before this began, we need to wrap our arms around what our what our options are as a district and as parents. If you choose to opt out, what does the district lose in terms of data? What would the repercussions be? I think it's something that would actually ultimately go back to a prior question, winds up being a priority of this new board to be able to articulate to all Hillside parents in really clear terms, in a pamphlet, this is testing today, and go from there. I don't have time to get to the second half of your question, but I think it's a critical part of what the board needs to do to communicate to elementary school parents. This is the picture.
Thank you. Mr. McQueen.
Yeah, tough one. Obviously, I don't know what the board is allowed to do and what latitude we have. It's such a hot button. I do think we over-test at a very young age. I do think and I respect the people that opt out. However, my personal philosophy is that we do take tests as adults. We do take tests as high school students trying to get into college. We do take tests trying to move ourselves along from grade to grade. I mean, I just don't think there's an answer for this. I think we should look into it. I'll just concur with Tim. If we don't know, and Jodie will answer what the board knows, I guess, but if we don't know, we should look into it, and we should communicate out what we find. And if we're able to do something about it, shame on us for not be thinking about it and not offering that up for the community to comment on.
Ms. Berman?
Thanks. Yes, 33% of Hillside opted out of the test the past 3 days. That's a significant number, and it should tell a message to the board about what our community expects of the classroom experience of its students. Yes, people do have testing in high school and college and beyond, but we're asking elementary school students to sit longer for tests than adults do when they take their LSAT. It's out of reason of what is expected of young people. With a strong curriculum in place that meets state standards, we don't have to make these testing moments high stakes. If we have a curriculum that's providing the types of skills and knowledge to children that it can be delivered more appropriately to students from teachers who are caring about providing student-centered learning experiences and project-based learning, we can move away from test-based learning and not make them high stakes, even if the state is requiring us to take them.
Thank you. Ms. Meyer?
So I do think that as a board, we are somewhat limited. I want to say that, we have to remember that we're a public school system, and so we have to weigh all of the information about where we stand with testing, what we do, how much we encourage opting out. But I do think there are two things we need to keep in mind. It's the kids, and it's also the teachers. And I think that testing does weigh heavily on children. I think often many of the tests are not appropriate for kids with special needs, especially. I mean, certainly the time that they take, but the time it takes in their day, the time it takes to sit and do it. And also with teachers, I think one of the things that the board is very conscious of, I don't think this district is a high-stakes testing district, but I think we're sort of caught in the business of being a public school system. But with teachers, I think we're very aware that we are not in favor of testing and test scores being a big part of how we evaluate teachers. That is not where the board has been all along. But I think that the other thing I think the board can do is that we can encourage parents to be involved. We can encourage, as we do, as the PTSA has done an incredible job of. Lisa is very active with advocacy, and I think and as a board, we can take a stand at times with the state and with other places where we can have our voices made about what we think about testing, the appropriateness. But the other thing is that we do need to find ways of assessing kids. We can't kid ourselves about that. We need feedback. Teachers need feedback.
Ms. Mitchell?
Hi, I'm in an interesting position because I'm administering these tests. So I'm seeing what's happening, I'm passing them out, I'm reading the directions, and I don't believe in them. I don't think they're good for kids, particularly for elementary school and middle school students. Not only does it impact them sitting there for 2.5 hours, now it's unlimited time. They could be sitting there for like 6 hours. Kids are overly stressed by this, but then, to be perfectly honest, the rest of the day is shot. These kids can't learn after taking a test for 2 hours. They really are just, it's very stressful for them. And I think it's counterproductive, and I think it goes against what we should be doing as educators and as a district. And I do think that the board has a responsibility to advocate against these tests. And part of what a board does is there is an advocacy level. Granted, we can't go against what New York State law is, but we can certainly send the message that, we don't, necessarily value this. We value what the teachers are doing and how the students are learning. I would also say that the iReady that came out this past year,
Stay tuned.
I'll try and come back to it later.
Sir, thank you for your great patience. Your question, if it's to all, will go to Mr. McQueen. Please ask your question.
All right. I wanted to jump off from something that Christina Mitchell said, and I hope I'm not misquoting you too much, but about the different kinds of kids and how the kids that get it are easy to teach, but the ones in the middle are maybe not so easy, and the ones who are struggling need a lot of help. I just want to change the emphasis on that and say that there are other kids that they're not defined as being special needs, but they do have special needs, and those are the kids that are above grade level and perhaps gifted and not challenged enough by the curriculum. And my experience at Hillside is that there's little or no attention paid to these kids. So what can we do about that? And what can we do to pay attention to the different, from the highest to the lowest in terms of achievement levels of the kids?
May we have your name, please, sir?
My name is Andy Zimmerman.
Thank you. Can we start with Mr. McQueen?
Yes, ma'am. Thanks, Andy. I am the father of a special needs child. Half of me despises that term. What makes her so special? What the love she gives me makes her special. The fact that she's my daughter, the fact that she loves my son, the fact that she hugs Rachel and I when we come home, whether it's been a half an hour or 10 hours, like she hasn't seen us in a month, special. You guys should all experience it. It's amazing. But my mother went to school at Plattsburgh to be a teacher 60 years ago. They taught her that every child learns differently, that every child needs to have the opportunity to learn the way they're capable of learning. I'd like to see some debate and discussion about not how we separate and put into buckets different groups and then how we address that, but how do we just have a philosophy of this district that every student learns differently? And we should be able to encourage our teachers, train our teachers to be able to act and teach that way and support them. You know, there's a lot of talk about how great our teachers are. Support them, train them, make them better. I don't like putting them just personally inside of buckets, whether it is brilliant kids who are bored, or whether it is my daughter, or whether it is just somebody who can't focus in class and needs the help. Every one of these kids can learn, and everyone needs the opportunity to learn the way they can, not to teach the way we want.
Thank you. Ms. Berman?
Thank you. I agree with what Mr. McQueen is saying. I really feel that our district can do so much more for individual children. I think that we do have a lot of data about how children are performing, and we have a lot of observation from teachers who care. And teachers know who those children are who are not being challenged or who need different types of challenges. And I don't know that they're receiving the types of support necessary to have the freedom to provide them the kind of teaching and learning experiences that they deserve. It's really stressful on children when they're not getting appropriate teaching. It makes them feel inadequate. It makes them uninspired to continue learning, even the most sophisticated of learners. It's important that as a district we really focus on how we can differentiate instruction and how we can work with our teachers to provide that equitably across all three schools.
Ms. Meyer?
Andy, I'm really glad that you asked that question, because I've always felt over the years, and believe me, I don't say that my kids were in that top upper sphere, so I'm not speaking personally about my own family, but I've always thought about the fact that we often talk about kids who aren't getting attention, and I agree with you, Rob, the whole special needs. I think learning differences is probably a better way to talk, but and parents have often complained that their kids either aren't getting attention and it's always seemed that there was a whole other group of children who were sort of not being challenged at the top. I don't know how teachers do it. I have to tell you, I have incredible respect for teachers. Christina, I don't know how you go into a classroom and you try to meet the needs of everybody. I think it's incredibly difficult. I think we need to have special opportunities. I don't know how old your kids are. I do think as they get further up in Hastings, there become more and more ways that they can be challenged. There are more classes at higher levels. We've even had times where we've let kids take courses outside of the district in terms of, more honors, AP, but specific things that they can, we have programs at all ends. We also have the HASP program for kids who are really, really struggling with being dropouts. But for the kids at the top, we have to find ways. I think teachers have to be given some, perhaps, professional development in the area, really, of how do we reach kids at every level, because teachers need some tools. I don't know how they do it every day.
Hi, yeah, that was a great question. I'd like to clarify, I in no way, shape, or form was trying to put kids in buckets. What I was trying to say is that we have kids who have all different learning needs. As a teacher, I see children who are at that top end, and they are easy to teach. That doesn't mean that I don't challenge them, and it doesn't mean that I don't provide them with opportunities for enrichment or to go beyond the benchmarks that have been set for them. I think that teachers have a responsibility to get to know every single one of their children that's in their classroom. And yes, you may have a lesson, yes, you may have a project, but you provide every child with an opportunity to learn to their ability, no matter what that is. Whether your ability is well beyond the expectation and the goal, or your ability is somewhere in the middle, or your ability is you're a struggling learner. And as a teacher, you're just trying to get them to learn the basics. So that's what I think great teaching looks like. And if you came to my classroom, I have to say, that's what you'd see. So anytime.
Now, Andy, I think it is an excellent question. And Jodie touched on some things that I immediately thought of when thinking about your question. I've heard that, well, two things. One, I've heard that feedback, I would say, about really high performers in the elementary school in Hillside. But I've also seen within the high school, somehow it's handled much better. Obviously, classrooms are different. The classroom experience is different. You're rotating. But the first thing that comes to mind, I don't have the personal experience, so I'm not tackling it right now. But the first thing that came to mind is, where do we get cross-collaboration between what's going on in the high school and what's going on in Hillside? Professional development has been talked about in this answer, and if you were at a board meeting 2 weeks ago, the desire for professional development among the Hillside staff is through the roof. I mean, they are hungry for it, which is a great thing. But it also is going to be professional development within the construct of the curriculum that they're developing. It's not responsive to the one individual student. But my thought process is the high school seems to do it, and we're not that far away. And so a professional development day is quite sensible for it to be a Hastings cross school to address that sort of issue, that specific issue, and figure out, strategize internally to figure out the solution to it.
Thank you. Before we go to the last two questions, again, I'd like to thank you both for your patience, great patience. I'm going to have to reduce the response time to 1 minute, and I recognize that's very arbitrary, but in the essence of time, we have to get that in, and also the closing statements. So may we have the next question, and this time, if it's to all of the board members, we'll start with Ms. Berman, but you'll all have just 1 minute to respond. Please.
There's been a lot of politics tonight, and I get it. I'm looking forward to a cohesive body that is efficient and effective and powerful and gets us out front in a very progressive way, by the way. I want to go home and tell my 10-year-old what might happen to his life simply. As an individual, if you could wave a magic wand What one small thing, not because it's strategic, not because the superintendent's going to make it happen, what one simple thing can I tell my 10-year-old you individually want to do to make his life better? Because he's your constituent, just so you know.
And what is your name, please?
Heather Moore.
Thank you. Ms. Berman?
I would, thank you. I would want to make your 10-year-old have more fun and feel more joy at school. I feel like the type of high-stakes testing environment that our teachers feel like they need to provide our students, whether or not that's true or not, that is the type of environment they're providing, needs to be changed. Students need to be able to have more opportunities to share more of themselves in their learning, and they need greater opportunity to work together, to learn together. And I feel like working cooperatively with other students and speaking more of themselves within the curriculum would give him more joy.
Thanks for that question. Yeah. I had the same answer in mind in a sense. To me, I think the most important thing and the thing I'd want to communicate to your child, or if it were mine, is that, and I don't know, maybe your child is happy in school, but not happy. Well, that's what I'd want to communicate, that we're going to find a way to make school a place that you like to go and you're happy at the end of the day. And that could be whether it's what you're doing in the classroom, having more choice, having it be more exciting, whether it's having more time for play. I really feel like kids don't have enough time for play. I think that homework is something that we have to look at really carefully. I'm very negative on homework. I don't think it's a terrible thing, but I think in the elementary school it should be reading or being read to, maybe some review or some projects. But I think the most important thing is that kids love going to school. And look, we all know it's not every day. We don't all love life every day. Kids don't love every day. Things happen. But for the most part, in the end, they're up here with really having a great year and loving school.
Thank you. Ms. Mitchell?
I guess my magic wand would be that when your son comes to school tomorrow, he is going to be met with a smile. He is going to be met with excitement and joy in that classroom, and that his teacher is going to have a lesson, and he's not going to know it's called a lesson, an activity, a project, that is going to bring out the best in him because it's going to tap into something that he's interested in. Every single child has a strength, and it is the job of the educator to figure out what that is and bring it out in the child. And when that happens, it's magic. And then you have that child, and that child then becomes invested, not just in that one particular day or that one particular activity, but then once you get them, then you can build on that. And then you build on his love for coming to school.
Yeah.
Mr. Baer?
Yeah, my magic wand wouldn't necessarily translate to fun, but as much as I would like it to, but it would translate to excited teachers that are looking forward to doing creative work, and your 10-year-old is going to feel that energy every day, on fun days and not so fun days. And that, I think, is a responsibility of the board and the district. That comes with supportive teachers, that comes with the development of teachers, that comes with articulating what needs to happen within Common Core and where we can deviate from Common Core. And this is an ongoing process as we continue to sort of grow out of the Common Core dark ages. But to keep pushing the limits of creativity, of engagement, of education of our teachers, because that directly translates into the classroom. And when the teachers are humming on all cylinders, I think our students, I think our kids really feel that. I've seen it in different stages with my daughter. The right classroom and the right engagement, man, it makes all the difference.
Thank you. Mr. McQueen?
Yeah, I think nobody would disagree with Tim on that. The right teacher and the right environment makes a huge difference. Lauren said joy. Jodie said happy. Christina said smile. And Tim said, I think, pretty much excited energy to combine it for the kid. Here's what I would say to him. That this room is going to stay engaged. This room is going to advocate on behalf of this constituency, the students. The first block in our block of how we want to partner for education is the student. I would tell that young child that I don't accept that Hillside is getting this reputation. I suppose deserved. I can't understand how a district like Hastings has an elementary school that is, for lack of a better term, the stepchild of the district. This is the most important time to hit and reach our children. I want them to have joy. I talk to my son about that a lot. But Hillside should not have this problem. Commit to fix the problem at Hillside, whatever that problem may be.
Thank you. Our last questioner, please. And again, thank you for your patience.
No, thank you guys for hanging in there. I'm Mary McDonald, and my question is, Hastings has become a lot more diverse over the last several years, just like the country has, and I heard you guys talk a little bit about promoting diversity and inclusion, and I wanted to know how will you promote things within the district to keep up with the diversity that we're seeing across the country and in Hastings specifically in terms of hiring. There has not been a change in terms of diversity, in terms of hiring in the last 20 years, and also in terms of professional development and curriculum as well.
Thank you. Ms. Baer, we'll start.
Wow, Mary. Mary's a product of this district, and it's great that you got up and asked a question. Okay, so you are spot on. It's about hiring, but it's also about the programs. We have a number of social and emotional learning programs that have been in the district. They've cycled through. Can't hear me? Okay. We have a number of social and emotional learning programs. We've had them off and on, and I think we have a number of new ones about to move into Hillside, into the middle school, and we're doing things in all three schools addressing issues of diversity with students and with teachers and providing professional development. As I said before, diversity is a lot of how I spend my work life at the medical school, and we have this new committee that's formed of teachers and administrators called Race Matters, and they have done an incredible job of putting together a curriculum, of reviewing what's in the schools, and they've just gotten money, the board has just given them money to put into place, and professional development, how we can not just talk the talk, but walk the walk so that we all can learn to talk about and think about issues of race and inclusion in general. I think we have to stay true to that.
Thank you. Ms. Mitchell?
Hi, Mary. Nice to see you again. So in terms of hiring, I don't know exactly how the district goes about, sort of advertising and whatnot, but I would suggest that we cast a broader net, that maybe we look into other organizations and different places to try and find new faces, different faces with different perspectives, point of views, and backgrounds. In terms of diversity, I think the programs here, they're great. I think that they need to be improved. Second Step, which I think is going to be brought into Hillside, has been used at FMS, is good. But I also think that you need to have programs that are part of the curriculum. Something like Facing History, Facing Ourselves, which uses the Holocaust and genocide as a vehicle to teach tolerance and identity and prejudice and learning about it. And that needs to be part of the curriculum. And I think that could be done through professional development.
Thank you. Mr. Baer?
Great. Thank you, Mary. So I'm glad you asked this question. It's pretty near and dear to me. The first thing I would say, it's super important from my perspective to just acknowledge, I think this community is amazing in this regard. I practically feel like my kids are growing up sort of lacking race awareness, but for, at home, which I actually think is actually a tremendous accomplishment and compliment to the community. In the interest of time, I think Race Matters is the tip of the iceberg and doing really tremendous thought. They are very thoughtful. Their last presentation, incredibly thoughtful with 4-point plan. I mean, they are really there. I think what the community has lacked has been, and there's because lots of other issues going on, but an embrace by the administration to say, this is important to individual teachers. We're going to take it, whether it's our own personal issue. We know it's your issue. We're going to take it and make it our issue. And once the administration buys it, it filters down. And that's going to make a difference in hiring, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you. Mr. McQueen?
Is it possible to ask a clarifying question without using 60 seconds of my time? Because I know it's the last question, but I just want to ask a question before I answer it, if that's okay. Just a clarifying question for Mary. Can you define diversity for me in your mind? When you ask the question, what is diversity? What kind of diversity are you asking about?
I actually prefer you to define it yourself.
Well, I can define it. I mean, I believe it's diversity across everything. Right?
I mean, because you were one of the individuals who started, who said diversity and inclusion.
Absolutely. I believe it in my professional and my personal life. Very proud of it. I think it's tough to define, and everybody looks at it a little bit differently. I think the simple answer, in the interest of time, is if our superintendent does not define that for us in his mind on what he thinks diversity and inclusion is, if the board does not support that or debate it and build on it, then I don't think it's going to matter how we hire or what our teachers think or what programs we put in. It has to start from the top. My personal experience is we're lacking in it. I'm glad to hear Tim say he feels like we're really strong in it. From a inclusion perspective of my daughter, I don't feel it. I have too many people tell me in that building that she shouldn't be in this school district. You keep the children home. That's inclusion to me. So that's how I would define it. But the answer is the CEO sets how we think about this. My first question for that super is going to be what he defines diversity and inclusion as.
Thank you. Ms. Berman?
Making children feel included primarily lies in the areas outside of instructional time. It comes on recess, the lunchroom, the bus, and it comes from having school-wide child-appropriate strategies to help children solve problems, to help children negotiate socially, and to work against exclusionary issues. I don't believe that there is a school, at least in Hillside, from my own experience as a parent, I don't believe there is a school-wide child-appropriate program to guide our staff, our aides, and our teachers with the same language and how we help children solve problems. I think that would be a solution, a step toward making children feel more included. It also comes from the types of materials we have in our classrooms, and if they reflect the community that we have in Hastings. It also comes from how we allow children to share themselves with their peers and their teachers.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone in the audience, not only for your questions, but also for your attention and for supporting the candidates. I want to remind you before they go to their 2-minute closing statement that you are going to be voting for 3 openings on the board. You have 5 candidates, obviously. Very, very tough choice, I know. We are going to have the 2-minute closing statements in reverse order, and we will start with Ms. Meyer.
Thank you. So I prepared my closing statement, but I'm going from the hip here because I think you know a lot of what I was already going to say because it's come out. I do want to thank everyone for coming tonight. I thought that this would be mostly Hillside parents, which I welcomed, but I am really delighted to see that this is really a cross-section of the community. And I want to say, I'm going to read a little bit and then I'm going to jump. I want to say to everyone here that I really know that as a parent, as cliched as it sounds, we all want what's best for our children. Not long ago, I was in the shoes of all of you who are here who are parents, and I was very passionate about my kids' education and their experience. And believe me, it doesn't get any different. When your kids are 30 years old, basically you still just want what's best for them. I applaud everyone for coming tonight, and to all the members here, I know you have kids and the community's best interest at heart. So I'm not going to talk about the challenges ahead, but I am going to reiterate what I said, because I really believe, and I don't know that the board has done the best job, but we do have to communicate better, and we will. Whoever the we is, I have no question that will happen, and that we will be transparent. But I also want to comment on something that's gone back to over and over tonight, which is about the board meeting the other night. It was a really divisive, very contentious board meeting, but I do have to say that at the end of the evening, the board came together and we agreed how we were going to proceed. And the policy that was being discussed, we agreed, because there was disagreement, that we would send it to our legal counsel, and we would also put off until the election and a new board to make a decision about the policy. And you'll learn, you'll be able, I'm not trying to keep things from you, there just isn't time. You know what differentiates me from the other candidates. I have a lot of experience. I have a long history of working with children and families as a psychologist, and I think it's my personal and professional experience in the district that gives me something that I can bring to this board again. And I want to add one other thing, which is we haven't talked at all about stress. I think it's key.
That's stress. Ms. Berman?
Thank you all for listening, for your questions, and for considering what I would offer to the board. Thank you to the League of Women Voters and to the PTSA for organizing this event. Effective classrooms have teachers who can meet each student where they are. That is only possible through observation and assessment. I am not defending it, but testing is not going away. Until and if legislation changes, we don't actually have to make tests high stakes for our youngest students. We can choose not to teach the test, we can end hours of test prep, and we can advocate for test refusal and for more appropriate and less testing. We can also use the testing data we do have to focus more on differentiation and highlight achievements that come from collaboration, imagination, and innovation. We can change the conversation about testing and what achievement means in our schools. Hastings schools are for all of our children. As a board member, it would be my role to support all students, first and foremost. I believe that in schools, children learn not only from their teachers, but they learn from each other. Our children spend more time in school than they do at home. The culture we cultivate for them matters. I would like the opportunity to work together to bring more joy into our children's lives so they are truly inspired to be lifelong learners and active citizens. When it comes to decisions that impact our children, I approach them thoughtfully and with a sense of urgency. A freshman is beginning high school but once. A kindergartner is only going to have their first day of school once. As an administrator, teacher, or even board member, one could easily lose sight of the fact that stalled decisions impact children in real time, affecting their schooling trajectory. I'm asking for your vote in the election on May 16th because I believe I will not lose sight of the futures that are at stake. Thank you for your consideration and for your support of Hastings schools.
Thank you. Mr. McQueen?
Thank you. Thanks to all of you for coming out. I think it's a bigger crowd than I certainly expected. And I do applaud also, not to be cliche, but 5 people running for 3 spots in a small town shows you the interest and the involvement and the passion that we have as a community to get this right. I'm not going to ask for your vote tonight. I'll ask for it on May 16th. I just want you to vote. Grab one other person who doesn't vote and bring them to vote. And vote your beliefs and what you would like from a board member. The times ahead, as Jodie and Tim and all of us have said, really important. Really, really important. If we don't fix the communication, it's not hard to send out a bullet point email the next day. It really isn't hard. I do it for a living. My website tells you what I think about Common Core and everything else. Christina and my website, right? I don't think those are the things that we have to be negotiating and debating and having a conversation about right now. I think we really have to just make sure that whatever's happening in this district does not happen behind closed doors. We really need to make sure that what happens in this district you're engaged with. It's a two-way street. It's all of us. The board, if I'm on it, will have someone who is concerned mainly with communicating, listening, and being a part of the conversation. We've made great strides in listening, I think. And we talk a lot about transparency, but you cannot be transparent if you don't communicate out. And so I hope that you'll vote for people that you believe will be a part of the conversation and will communicate out and will do things with true transparency.
Thank you. Mr. Baer?
Sure. Well, thank you all for coming out. This has really been a great experience. I think we probably potentially even overplayed the challenges that have existed on the board, at least in the 6 months that I've been on it. But being part of this experience tonight, and also knowing who we expect to have as a superintendent starting in July, I really am truly excited about beginning a new chapter for Hastings, and I really do think it will be exceptional. I think what you'll see is the board beginning to work together. I would just use the word better than it has in the past, with a collective vision. I think that the strategic planning process should really be exciting and embraced by the entire community. I think that what I will tell you is, when you think about, Tim Baer on the board, recognize, I would say, I am not going to try to determine what the curriculum is at Hillside. I think Amy Kazis is there, and I have the utmost respect and confidence in Amy Kazis. I think the superintendent coming online is going to be part of the hiring process for a new curriculum director, and we're going to figure out what the right structure is for Hillside and Farragut. And we're going to work together to put our administrators in a place to craft the right future for our kids. Something that hasn't come up tonight, but I think it's important just to leave it for everyone to think about, is the fiscal side matters. 2010, everyone was ready to strangle each other, and it wasn't clear whether the budget was going to pass. It's not popular to talk about in a forum like this. It's very important to me, such that we're not 2 years down the line in a different situation, worrying about money to pay for things.
So I see the role of the Board of Education as one that is really going to foster partnerships. And I think those partnerships need to occur between parents, teachers, administrators, students, and the community at large. We need to be a community of learners together. And that is what I feel has been missing. It feels like there have been things that have been going on in this district in pockets. And as a result, there has been a lack of cohesiveness. And that is in large part because of the tone and the pace and the tenor that is set by the people at top, the current superintendent and the Board of Education. We cannot, as a Board of Education, simply rubber stamp whatever the superintendent recommends. We need to take a look at it, and we need to look at it critically. We need to talk about it, we need to discuss it, and when appropriate, we need to get community input. Because we represent you. We work for you. Every child can learn. And it is our duty to do our utmost to ensure that the superintendent is creating an environment in which that occurs, and that the administrators are doing that as well. And I feel that I would be a really good person to be on the Board of Education. I understand how schools work. I've been in them for over 20 years. I know how boards work, at least from the outside. I know how administrators work. I know how teachers work. And that insight can help this Board of Education, I think, have another perspective that it lacks.
Thank you. And let's show our appreciation for all of these wonderful candidates. also for your patience and your courtesy and your attentiveness as an audience. I just want to remind you that the election is on the Tuesday, the 16th, sorry about that, and you will be voting at Hastings High School in the Cochran Gym. If somebody can tell me what the hours are of the election, I would...
7 a.m. to 9 p.m.
7 a.m. to 9 p.m. Thank you. Thank you, and remember to... Pardon me?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks to the League of Women Voters and the PTSA. Thank you.